Hello, this is Lisa, your host of Unexplained America, and thank you for joining me this week. I do actually have Daryl in the background. He is not going to be like on a mic this week, my husband Daryl, but he is in the studio pod with Paris. Which is my office. So, quick business. I do have a Patreon shout out to Melissa. Thank you, Melissa, for being a Patreon. If you wish to join the Patreon, go to the show notes and there is a link to join. Now, there's tons of bonus episodes that are not available like on the main channel. So, go join the Patreon and lots of bonus episodes. This week's episode is Amityville, the Defeo Family Murders. Now, this is one of the saddest cases that I've ever heard of. And of course, what's truly sad to me is that the Defeo family, like the victims, really get lost in just all of the chaos that I'll be getting into on the next episode. So I'm going to do an episode like all of this is just covering the Defeo family and what happened to them and everything with like Ronnie Defeo, which we'll get into. But the next episode, my 100th episode, which I am really excited and can't believe that I'll be on my 100th episode, but that is going to be the Amityville horrors, the Lutz family haunting. So all of that is going to be in the 100th episode. So stay tuned for that. But this week's episode is just solely focusing like on the Defeos. So on November 13th, 1974, the Defeo family would be shot and killed in the house as they slept. The Defeo's oldest son, Ronald Jr., would be arrested, tried, and convicted for killing his family that night. And a whole world of fascination, horror, and fame would put the town of Amityville on the map. Okay, I'm going to start at the beginning with who were the Defeos. Ronald Joseph Defeo Sr. was born in New York City on November 16th, 1930, to parents Rocco and Annette Defeo. Now, Ronald's father was a printer for a newspaper. His mom kept the home. They were of Italian descent, like we're talking like his grandparents, like Ronald's grandparents, like came from Italy, like both sides, just all Italian, and they were Catholic, and they were just a large, like really close-knit family. Now, his family lived in the Queens area of the city, and of course, in New York City, you have the 5 boroughs, so it kind of looks like he lived kind of in the Queens or Brooklyn areas, okay? Now, Ronald was very handsome. He was tall. He had dark hair, kind of a wave to it. And in his younger years, he was just very, very athletic and slender. And he played all the sports. Like he was very sporty. Now, by 1950, he had graduated high school and he was working as a helper in a silk factory. Now, and still in New York, he never moved. Now, by 1950 as well, Ronald began dating a Louise Marie Brigante. Now, Louise was born in New York City, just like Ronald. She was born November 3rd of 1931. So keep that in mind. A lot of Novembers in this, and I don't know if that means anything, but that's very interesting to me. Now, Louise is also Italian, like both sides of her family. I think literally like her grandmother was born in Italy, and some of the family, like they all spoke like Italian and such. Now, her parents were Michael John Brigante Sr. and Angelina Maria Calabrese Brigante. Yes. Now, she looks like she went by Angela, so her mom went by Angela. Now, Louise's father, Michael, he and some partners, and this gets a little muddy, and we'll talk about this. They had an automobile dealership in Brooklyn called Brigante Carl Buick Dealership. Now, it is alleged, and a lot of this whole Defeo case will discuss like Mafia ties, okay? But it is alleged that the Carl, part of that Brigante Carl, was actually Carlo Gambino, okay? He is the head and namesake of the Gambino crime family, one of the top crime families. So there were connections, like alleged connections, maybe even more of alleged connections that we'll kind of talk about, like, in this whole, like, case, okay? So there was a lot of mafia connections. And I will say, I mean, this is, the 50, it's definitely there. There was probably definitely a lot of connections that were possible. So we'll just say that. Louise, she was like the only, I don't know if she was the only daughter, period. No, she wasn't the only child, but she was the only daughter of Michael Brigante. And it said that he loved Louise, and she was very, like, spoiled. She was just very loved by her father and doted on, okay? Now, Louise, upon graduating high school, she went to work for the dealership. So she was working for the dealership, like, right away. Now, she and Ronald, again, started dating kind of in the 1950s. Now, on April 28th of 1951, they were married. And by November, yes, I said November, that same year, they had Ronald Jr. Yes. So I don't think the families, evidently it is alleged that, like, Michael Brigante wasn't a huge fan of Ronald Defeo to begin with. I don't think he was a huge fan of, him. And of course, I mean, obviously he wouldn't have loved that she was pregnant before they got married. So, like, the families didn't love it at the beginning, so to speak. Now, Louise's father, of course, he's thinking, Michael Brigante is like, I have this dealership. Louise is like his favorite, and she's working for the dealership. So, like, Michael brings Ronald Sr., and we're gonna call him, like, Ronnie Sr., okay? But he brings Ronnie Sr., or I think they called him Big Ronnie, like, he brings him into the car business with him. And I will say, by 1965, Big Ronnie, his title there is service manager. And of course, they have, like, a whole, they're living in Brooklyn where the dealership is, and they have this family going. So, 51, they have Ronald Jr. In 1956, they give birth to Dawn Teresa. And then by 1961, they have another girl named Allison Louise. And then 1 year later, they have Mark Gregory. And then in 65, they have their fifth and final child, John Matthew, okay? So they have 5 children, and they're still living in Brooklyn by, like, 1965. So in 1965, while pregnant, Big Ronnie decides he wants to get his family out of Brooklyn, and he wants to buy a large family home in the suburbs. And there is a very nice suburb, like, on Long Island, called Amityville. So he finds a beautiful 3-story Dutch colonial home. It's like 3,600 square feet. It has 5 bedrooms. It has 4 bathrooms. It is literally right on the water in the village of Amityville, and the address is 112 Ocean Avenue. Now, a little tidbit about Amityville. So it is literally a village of the town of Babylon in Suffolk County, New York, and it is located on the south shore of Long Island. And this home was literally right kind of like on an inlet, so it was like on the water. It had water access. They had like a boathouse. I mean, it was a beautiful situation. Now, they closed on the home in June of 1965, a few months before, John was born, which was their 5th child. And they paid $30,000 for this home, which would be like kind of the equivalent of purchasing a home for $300,000 now. So it is a very nice starter home. And really, like, I looked at the median home sales in 1965 in Long Island, and the median sale was like $21,000, just for reference, because there's a lot of things made about how that they couldn't afford this home, that it was like just really lavish, which it is a very nice home, by the way. But there was a lot of talk about how, the family had help from Michael to purchase it, but I just kind of wanted to put in here that may not have been, he may have helped them with like a down payment or whatever, and he may have even bought the house for them. But just for reference, this wasn't like $1 million situation. So just kind of, I felt like that got away. And even when the murders happened, it was like in the newspapers about how much the home was worth and all these things. But anyway, so it's just a very nice home. It was a very nice situation. It would have been lovely for this family living in Brooklyn, living in an apartment, to have some space. I mean, there's a lot of them. So can you imagine living in Brooklyn with 5 children? So 7 people in an apartment? No. Yeah. Daryl's face like no. Okay, so the house was built in 1925, and obviously, like by the time that they purchased it, I mean, it's like 40 years old. It did need some upgrades. It said that the DeFeos remodeled, they decorated the home for their taste. They did add an in-ground pool. It was said that the pool was like heated, and again, it had a very nice situation. It had a boathouse. It was just a very beautiful setup for the family. Now, a little side note about the house, because I just find this so intriguing. So the home on Zillow currently is worth, the estimate is like 1.1 million. But the last time it sold, it was way below market. Like it sold in 2017 for $605,000. A lot of money, but we're talking New York, people, okay? Now, it was listed off and on at that time for like $850,000. And again, it sold for $605 in 2017. Now, the highest it ever went for was like $950,000, which was like in 2010, maybe when things were just at a up, or maybe when the house was just in a good position or whatever. But I actually went to New York City myself a couple summers ago, and I really wanted to go see the house. I didn't realize how close it was. I mean, it's literally like right outside the city. It maybe takes an hour or so to get there with traffic. It's like 42 miles from New York City. So, as you can see, Ronnie Sr. was commuting in to work or whatever. And that's not unusual for people to do, of course. But I never made it out of the city. Now, my Uber driver, I think it was maybe Lyft. But anyway, one of my drivers, like we were talking about it, and he actually lived on Amityville and in Amityville, and he like walks by the house like all the time. He's like, oh yeah, I walk by the house. It's like, it's a beautiful home, blah, 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 like all the time. So it's just crazy. That's like my list. I want to see that house in person. So anyway, now it said that upon this move, like this was again, a huge deal for the DeFeos to get this like dream come true house for them, like this super nice, spacious home for their family. Now, upon moving in, Ronald Sr., he like makes it's like a wood carved sign in the yard, and it states high hopes. And again, that just kind of spoke for what he hoped for the family, what he thought. And I'm sure you've seen the house, like when you're looking, I guess the house, it's on a very narrow lot. So the house actually sideways on the lot. So the infamous picture of like the house and then the old windows that it had that kind of look like eyes, like that is like the quote unquote front street, like that Ocean Avenue, but you're looking at the side of the house there. But anyway, that's where he hung the High Hope sign, and he had like a whole garden there. But this was a dream come true for them. Now, again, Ronnie Sr. was commuting. The children were enrolled in the local Catholic school, which was connected to their church called St. Martin of Tours Church, or school with the church. And this school church situation was literally only like half a mile from their home. So it was just perfect. And the family was living and thriving. They were getting well connected. And again, they moved in 65. And of course, this horrible thing happened in 74. So just 9 years of just connecting in this whole community. And the Defeo family was described by their neighbors and friends as sweet, religious, family-minded, very good and generous people. The youngest kids were called adorable. Of course, Dawn and Allison and Louise were called beautiful. Ronnie Sr. was big and boisterous, but he was also described as like caring, protective. And then Louise is just super sweet and pretty. So just a very normal, family, normal Italian family living in Long Island, just very normal. Now, in 1974, Ronald Jr., and I'm going to call him Ronnie, as he was in like the court records, and most of the people refer to him as Ronnie. He was also called Butch, if you've seen that, but I'm going to call him Ronnie. Now, Ronnie was 23. He was working at the car dealership with his dad. Dawn was 18 and attending a secretarial school. Allison 13, Mark 11, and John 9, and they were all going to the St. Martin of Tours school associated with the church. Now, the family, of course, is heavily rooted in the community. They're well connected with their church and neighbors. It's said that they would have pool parties. Ronnie Sr. would like carpool or take, neighbors into the city when he went. He's driving into city to work anyway. They had they were hosting the pool parties. They had prayer circles going on. They had this like beautiful fountain in their yard next to the High Hope sign, and they had a statue of St. Joseph holding baby Jesus. They were just, again, described as very devout and family oriented. The four youngest being described as funny and bright, beautiful children. Ronnie, his description was a little bit different. Now, it is mentioned, and this is Ronnie Jr., it's mentioned that he had some emotional troubles. His parents kind of had issues with him, and even, as a youngster, there were issues, there were signs. He was just always in trouble, quote unquote. There was one point, I think he was around 13, and he, attacked his grandfather. And so, Louise and Ronnie Sr. took him to a psychiatrist. And I would think, this is the 60s. This would be very progressive thing to do. And especially for Italian dad, that's probably like, oh, you should just mind. Well, and used to spankings. And then, of course, there is spankings. It is alleged that Ronnie Sr. was like really hard on Ronnie Jr. and would beat him. I think other people mentioned that he was spanked. And this is a time when the nuns, even at the school that Ronnie would have been going to, could actually hit the children, with rulers and such. So anyway, a very different time and space, but I thought it was very interesting that they took him to a psychiatrist. So again, 50 years ago, people. So the psychiatrist thing didn't work for Ronnie Jr. So really, the Defeos really after that, they gave in to every request of Ronnie's, good or bad. They gave into it. So by 14, Ronnie Sr. had purchased Ronnie Jr. a $14,000 speedboat to just hang out in, to take out whenever he wanted. Whenever Ronnie wanted money, he was just given money. We're talking by his parents, by his grandfather, just whoever. He was just given anything and everything. He had outbursts and such, and he had a love of guns, and his outbursts and love of guns collided in two different episodes that people would mention after the fact. Now, one time he was evidently said to be hunting with some school buddies, and he pointed a loaded rifle at one of the young men, and the boy just went pale, just went white, and just ran off. And luckily, before anything else could happen. Now, another incident was when, it said that Ronnie Sr. and Louise were fighting at the time. And it is alleged that they had a very volatile relationship, that there was even a point in the marriage, maybe before they had moved to Amityville, that she had left him. And it is alleged that he was abusive to her or whatever. Now, anyway, it said that Ronnie Jr., hearing their argument, comes down out of his room with a 12-gauge shotgun and points it directly at Ronnie Sr., and he pulls the trigger, but the gun doesn't go off. Now, this is said to have happened 1 year before the murders take place, okay? Now, by age 17, Ronnie was asked to leave like the Catholic school. He had been through several schools. Of course, he had grown up in Brooklyn and such, but there were several schools there that he was kicked out of, and then he was asked to leave, the Catholic school where his siblings went there in Amityville. Now, he was using drugs, he was using heroin and LSD, and he was starting to get in trouble with stealing. Now, Ronnie, was known in Amityville. He was known to the police. In fact, he just did not have a good reputation. And by 1973 or so, Ronnie was arrested and in trouble for stealing an outboard motor in town. And he was on probation. In fact, he was still on probation from this incident at the time of the murders in November of 74. Now, 2 weeks out from the murders, it is said, and we'll talk about this, but Ronnie was dissatisfied with his so-called low income, which from everybody else's account, he was getting paid quite a bit to work at the dealership, and he was paid quite a bit to not really do a lot of work, quote unquote. Like, he missed a lot of work. He didn't work much when he was there. Like, he was getting paid a really good salary for not a lot of work. Evidently, he put together a ploy with another employee at the dealership to steal some money. So they decided that they would get, quote unquote, robbed when they would take the day's deposit to the bank. So, and again, this is 2 weeks out. So this would have been sometime at the end of October of 1974. Now they leave for the bank with $1,800 in cash, and they have $20,000 in checks. And they were gone for 2 hours. Then they come back with this story of being held up at gunpoint. And when they return, like, Ronnie Sr. was mad. He was yelling at them. He was yelling at the other employee for even taking Ronnie Jr. with him to go to the bank. Like, he was furious. So they do call the police. They call the police about this stealing. The police question, Ronnie and the other employee, and like, kind of were like, okay, what happened during these 2 hours? Like, why were you gone for 2 hours just to the bank? And kind of Ronnie Jr. became belligerent. He became angry. He was clearly on the defense. Like, he couldn't answer the questions. He was running around in circles. And we'll see this. He's a liar, okay? And we'll see this. So Ronnie Sr. could tell what was going on. So he was kind of even backing off of the whole police thing. Like, he was like, okay, yeah, my kid did this. Like, this was what it was looking like. Even right before the death, like the night before, or I want to say a day or two before the deaths, the police had asked Ronnie to come by to look at some mug shots of some potential people that could have, been the culprits, but he refused. Like, he never showed up at the police station. So again, yeah. And I will say, Ronnie Sr., even though he was hard on Ronnie Jr., if Ronnie Jr. was in trouble with the police, like when he got in trouble with the police, like Ronnie Sr. went on the defense and he protected Ronnie Jr. Like, he didn't, yeah, it was a complicated situation for sure with that. On Wednesday, November 13th, 1974, around 6:30 p.m., Ronnie, he runs into Henry's bar, just like very close to his parents' house, and he screams, "You gotta get help. I think my mother and father are shot." His best friend, his name was Robert Kelsky. He called him Bobby. There was another friend named Joey Yeswit, and then 3 other guys. They run from the bar. They jump into actually Ronnie's car, and they all go driving, which is like right around the corner, to Ronnie's house. Now, Ronnie is just sobbing and crying. The men run into the home. They run upstairs, and I believe that like Bobby was the first, and they find Louise and Ronnie Sr. dead in their bed, and there's blood everywhere, and they just see that they are dead. They've been shot. They can tell that they've been shot. You can see, and there will be crime scene pictures. I will not be posting. They are awful. They're not the type of thing that you need to have like online or anything, but they are on my social medias. I'm not going to do that, but they, you can clearly see Ronnie Sr. is laying on his bed, face down, and there is a shot in his back. And then they couldn't see Louise, but they can just see blood everywhere. So they know that something terrible has happened. Joey runs down the stairs. He calls for help. So he calls 911. At 6:35, he gets a hold of them and he states, "We have a shooting here, Defeo." And Joey is asked about the phone number there and address, and he doesn't know it. Like, he's just a friend from the bar, okay? He can say the home is like on Ocean off of Merrick, like he's trying to describe it, but he doesn't know the actual address. So he's like, it's Ocean Avenue off of Merrick, which Merrick was like where the bar was located. So the operator connects Joey to the Suffolk County Police, who tell him to hold tight, and they'll send the Amityville like village police people over. Now, the first officer on the scene is a Kenneth Gergeski. Now, he finds this whole group of men like surrounding Ronnie, trying to console him like out in the yard. And again, Ronnie's sobbing and crying and screaming. Now, Officer Gergeski, he goes inside the home and finds Mark and John along with the parents' bodies on the second floor. So the boys did share a room, and it was kind of across the hall from the parents. So he calls in to the police station that there are 4 dead at the residence. Now then Ronnie, so he gets Ronnie inside in the kitchen where the phone is, and Ronnie looks at him and mentions that he has 2 sisters. So then Officer Gergeski, who has now been joined by another officer named Edwin Tyndall, they search more, and they find Allison in her bedroom on the second floor. So there's 3 bedrooms on the second floor. They find Allison dead, and then they find Dawn. Dawn is on the 3rd floor in her bedroom. Now, Ronnie Jr.'s room, he has a room upstairs, was on the 3rd floor with Dawn's. Now, the officers cannot see the extent of the injuries. All they know is that it appears the family's been shot. There is blood all over the place. The doors, the walls, the beds. I mean, they're blood soaked. They can just tell that they're all lying down, face down in their beds, in their pajamas, and blood's everywhere. And again, this is like 7:00 at night now, okay? But this is what they're seeing. So Gergeski calls the station back to let them know that there are 6 bodies. Now, by 7 p.m., word had spread in the neighborhood. People were all over the street. They're looking at the house. The press is showing up. And just a little tidbit, like Amityville, again, this is a quiet suburb. Now, in the past, Amityville actually had kind of a little bit of a quote-unquote shady past. Like, evidently Al Capone had lived there. He had a summer home there in the 20s and 30s. Amityville was known for like bootlegging, but this was a very quiet, not a lot of murder going on, okay? This was not New York City. This was Amityville. So this went national news by literally the next day. So the press were everywhere. They're on top of this whole thing. And this is way before the Lutz, people, okay? Way before the Lutz. This is just, because this incident, 6 people, a whole family being murdered. This was horrendous, of course. This is awful. Now, a homicide detective from Suffolk County. So, of course, Amityville is tiny. So they call in Suffolk County to come on board. Now, so a homicide detective is there, and his name is Jasper Randazzo. So he shows up. He begins to question Ronnie. He's asking Ronnie, like, do you have any idea who could have done this? Like, who could have killed your family? Now, Ronnie, this gets a little muddled. So one article mentioned that it was a Louis Fellini that is mentioned, an alleged hitman from the Mafia. Now, I'm going to go by this rendering. Now, there is a book written by the actual judge on the case of Ronald Defeo Jr.'s case. So he said it was a Tony Mazzeo, I believe, Mazzano. Basically, Ronnie mentions a Tony Mazzano, who was in the Mafia, allegedly, who was connected to the family, who had actually lived with the family for a minute. He was the one that would have a grudge against the family. He felt like he was the killer. That's what Ronnie is saying to the police. So more and more police and technicians are showing up, and they're interviewing like the next door neighbors. In fact, they kind of move, like they're working in the house, so they move the whole operation of talking to Ronnie to the neighbors. So they just move over there. They ask Ronnie, because of this possible involvement of the Mafia, could Ronnie still be a target? Like, they wanted to move him to the police station for more talking and safety. So Ronnie agrees to that, and that's what they do. Now, another detective shows up, a Joseph Napolitano. So Ronnie has given like a written statement. Like, he said he had stayed up late on the night of the 12th, and he had actually stayed home from work on the 12th because he didn't feel well. So he's saying he stayed up really late on the 12th, which would have been the morning of the 13th, watching a movie on TV called Castle Keep. Now, by 4 a.m., he said he was still awake, like he had gone to sleep and woke back up, and he walked past the bathroom and noticed that Mark's wheelchair was actually outside of the door of the bathroom. And this is at 4, and so this would have meant that he came downstairs to where Mark's bedroom was in the bathroom, and that he witnessed Mark, using the bathroom. Now, Mark was utilizing a wheelchair because he had had an injury playing football, okay? He says that he hears Mark flush, and then because he couldn't sleep, like he states that he goes ahead and gets ready for work. He goes in to work. He works until about noon, and then he meets up with his girlfriend named Sherry. This gets a little convoluted too, because there was one outlet that says Sherry, there's another that says Mindy. So yeah, we'll go with that. Now, his friend Bobby, that same Bobby, they all mess around, they drink a little bit, and so this is on the 13th, and he is continually trying to get a hold of his parents. And allegedly, like, he comes by the house, but he doesn't have his keys, and the house looks dark, but the car's there, like, he's not understanding it. So he finally, he actually goes to the Henry's bar for a while, still trying to call the family home, and finally leaves the bar at like 6. And that's when he goes home. He says he breaks into the kitchen through a window and then finds his parents killed, runs back to Henry's bar. So he signs this statement with the detectives, okay? Now, the police are continuing to ask him questions specifically about this whole Mafia connection, the whole Tony Mazzano, or quote-unquote Louis Fellini. There's several names going around. So he's just asking more and more questions about this. He even states that allegedly this Tony person had actually helped carve out a hiding place in the Defeo's basement where he and, Ronnie Sr. had stashed money and gems. And then they had a falling out. Senior got mad about it or whatever. So they had a huge falling out, and that's why he was mad. So this is what he's telling the cops about the why when asked more about it. It's getting late there at the police station, and so around 10-ish, they allow for Ronnie to sleep in a cot in the police station there, and so he goes to sleep, okay? They just let him rest. While the police are dealing with Ronnie, obviously there's a lot going on at the house. So police technicians are showing up, photographer, they're having to take pictures, and we'll get into that. The ME's office, they're called in. So by 8:20 p.m. that night on the 13th, a Dr. Howard Adelman, the deputy chief medical examiner for Suffolk County, so he arrives, and he goes through all the bedrooms, and he has to officially pronounce each of the Defeos as dead. Between 11 p.m. and 12:25 on the 14th, personnel from the medical examiner's office, they load up all 6 bodies and load them into 2 vans to take them to the morgue where the autopsies will be conducted. And they do these autopsies, I will say, right away, like right away. Also at the scene is Suffolk County Detective Howard Summers. So he was responsible for taking photographs of the entire interior and exterior of the home. So he would compile 11 rolls of film in all. And again, you can Google there, you can see the crime scene photos. I think it's good to kind of see how it all went down, and goodness, it's just it's awful, awful situation, but to see them actually in their beds, how they were found. Now, again, I'm not going to be posting them on my social medias or anything, but I will be attaching like the websites with like the crime scene notes. So that'll be in the show notes. By 1 o'clock now this is now the 14th, Dr. Adelman is joined by another, doctor in the office named Dr. Rappaport. Now they conduct the post-mortem exams of the DeFeos with the detective Robert Schumacher representing the Suffolk County Police. So Dr. Adelman begins first with the autopsy of Mark. Now, he found he had an entry wound in the lower left middle of his back, and it had powder burns around the wound. Now, his cause of death was a bullet wound that penetrated his heart, liver, diaphragm, pericardium, and ribs. So basically just destroyed his inside. It said that he, more than likely died instantly. And Mark, was, again, he was already injured from playing football, but he was the second youngest of the DeFeo children. Now, at 1:30 or so, Dr. Adelman began the exam on Louise. Now, she had 2 wounds. So wound number 1, the entry was on her right posterior side, 46 inches over her right heel, and a second entry wound, number 2, is on the upper front right posterior side. Now, one of her bullets actually went in her and then through her arm out her wrist because of just the way she was shot. Now, her cause of death was massive internal and external hemorrhaging due to the bullet wounds of the chest, abdomen, the penetration of her liver, her diaphragm, her lungs, heart, ribs, sternum, her breast, and left wrist. So it's just caused massive hemorrhage. I mean, this is shotgun. This is horrible. Now, her examination reflects that it looked like she had sat up, and in fact, she grabbed her gold chain that was around her neck. And so she was even photographed in kind of a death grip with the chain in her hand. It is evident that she was up, but based on the wounds and the scene and the blood splatters, it is evident that some of the DeFeos were moved, okay? So they were placed in the position of being face down, not necessarily face down when they were shot, because Louise was clearly not. And she was wrapped up in a blanket, okay? So she was killed, placed, and wrapped up. Get that idea. Now, Dr. Rappaport begins working on Allison, and Allison was only 13 years old. He begins at around 1:15. He notes that she had post-mortem lividity in the front portion of her body. Rigor mortis had set in. She had an entrance wound on her left cheek, and the wound was like ringed with like pock marks. So kind of like stippling. They call it stippling. So basically from just like with Mark, it was mentioned like the gunpowder. So that evidently was by the close range. So the person that shot her, we're talking a shotgun. It is a bedroom, and she's laying in her bed, and you can see in pictures like her bed was right beside the actual, like her bed is right beside the actual door to where the person probably stood, shot her. So it's very close range. These things are very close range. Like the parents' bedroom was larger, so they did not have the same stippling effect as like the children. Okay, so just her cause of death was a bullet wound to the head and brain that caused massive hemorrhaging. Now, at 2:40 a.m., Dr. Rappaport began working on Dawn. Now, Dawn also had the lividity and the rigor mortis had set in. And in her case, her clothes were bloodstained. We'll kind of get into this, but her clothes were bloodstained as opposed to Allison. Now, her entry wound was at the base of the skull at the back of her neck. Now, Dawn had multiple fractures in her skull, and later on at trial, Dr. Adelman explained the whole portion of the left side of her face was concave and had collapsed under the explosive effect of the wound. So basically, it was just the way she was shot, it was just explosive. And of course, again, it's a shotgun, blast. Now, like Allison, her cause of death was a bullet wound to the head, brain, causing the massive hemorrhaging. At 2:42 a.m., Dr. Adelman, so kind of at the same time that Dr. Rappaport is working on Dawn, he's working on Ronnie Sr. He states the cause of death on him was bullet wounds of the chest and abdomen. The doctor noted that his heart had been shattered and his spleen lacerated. Now, Ronnie Sr., he had 2 entry wounds, but only 1 exit wound. So one of the bullets did not exit his body, and it was removed during autopsy. Now, and he was a large man. Now, wound number 1 was in the middle of the back left of the backbone and 51 inches above the right heel. Wound 2 was in his lower left back. Now, so far, again, the blood patterns and everything is suggesting that for sure Louise moved, possibly Ronnie Sr. had moved, and that Allison had moved. And Dawn, her clothes were soaked. Now, it looked like the little boys, they did not look like they had moved at all, like they had just been shot where they lay. But there was evidence that not all the Defeos were just laying there, being shot, because that gets into a lot of speculation. Okay, so at 2:50 a.m., Dr. Adelman begins the final autopsy on John Defeo. Now, he ruled the cause of death really similar to Mark as massive hemorrhaging of the liver, diaphragm, lung, heart, vertebral column, spinal cord, and thymus. John's he had 1 wound, was in his back 36 inches above the right heel and 1 inch to the right of his middle back. And it is very apparent, again, to the boys in the crime scene photos that they were asleep. They were just asleep and shot. Now, crime technicians, they are working until all hours of the night. So while the autopsies are going on, they're working. Of course, the detectives have, Ronnie at the police station. So a detective, John Sherville, so he is making like a last sweep of the Defeo bedroom. So like the bodies are out, he's going back in. So they had done like a very thorough search of like the little boys' rooms, the sisters' rooms, and then the parents' rooms where the killings had happened. But they had kind of like not like really dive deep into Ronnie Jr.'s room, okay? So the detective Sherville, he goes in to take a deeper look at Ronnie's room, and he finds a box for a Marlin rifle. He finds 22 and 35 caliber bullets, like cartridges. He finds those. And at that time, he's not aware, like he doesn't know what kind of bullets or gun, like he doesn't know. He just knows that the Defeos have been shot, but he does not know any particulars as far as like bullets or whatever. But he saves like all this evidence, like he collects all this evidence. Now the detectives, and of course, while Ronnie's sleeping, they're still working, and of course they're finding this gun evidence, and they're also having conversation with Ronnie's friends. And Bobby is talking to them. Bobby is interviewed during this time, and he does tell the detectives like what a gun fanatic Ronnie is. And so they just kind of begin to put things together, like they're kind of looking more closely now at Ronnie. Okay. Now around 8:30 a.m. on the 14th, they wake Ronnie up there at the police station. A detective, George Harrison, he reads Ronnie his rights, and Ronnie begins arguing. He is like, I had nothing to do with this. I waive my rights. Stop reading them to me. I'm professing my innocence. Like, he is like on the defense, like right away. Another detective is called in, a Dennis Rafferty, who has a lot of experience. At that time, he had worked around 50 homicide cases at this point. So he begins kind of pointing out that the whole family, was found in bed, lying in their bedclothes. Like, he's pointing this out. He's like, this timeline that you had given us, that you've said to us, just isn't making, like, why would they have just been shot when you found them? This just isn't making sense. Like, he's pointing this out. Like, they're in their pajamas, they're in their beds. This doesn't make sense, Ronnie. Make this make sense. So they're pushing Ronnie. They're pushing him. They're prying and poking holes at his previous statements. On questioning, Ronnie begins to crumble, and he begins to alter his story. And all of a sudden now he's saying, well, perhaps at the time of the murders, maybe it happened between 2 and 4 a.m. on the 13th. And he's like, maybe. He's saying that. Like, maybe this happened. Then, all of a sudden, at first he had said that he knew nothing of it. He wasn't there. Now he's saying, okay, well, maybe I heard some shots. And the detectives are honing in on this. Okay, they're like, okay, he's changing his story. Wait a minute. He's admitting that he maybe heard the shots? Like, what? Detective Rafferty is hammering on these discrepancies on Ronnie's statements, and even talking about the actual physical evidence, that they've gotten from the police. And they're pointing out how they have evidence, because they had heard, they found what was in his room. They said they had evidence that a .35 caliber gun, when it was in his bedroom, they found the box. So they're stating to him, kind of alleging to him, hey, was this the gun that was used? And now Ronnie is, okay, well, I was there. I kind of heard this. Like, he is not making any sense. So now his story is that he was in his bed, asleep. He hears 7 gunshots. He gets up, and then he finds Dawn, who is dead, in the room beside him. And he finds a rifle. And he says he picks up the rifle. And then he tells the police, he goes around to the bedrooms, he finds the cartridges, and he picks those up. And he puts the cartridges in a pillowcase. So now he then finds a rifle scabbard, and I didn't know what that was. I had to Google that. And with a leather holster. Then he finds some .35 caliber ammunition. So he is talking about how he's finding these items, and he puts them in a pillowcase. And then he decides to shower because he's bloody. He says he's bloody, and his clothes are bloody from picking up the cartridges, specifically in Allison's room, because there was a pool of blood in there. And all of this goes into the pillowcase, plus the towel he used to shower. He then tells the police, so I've done this, I've showered, I'm leaving the house he leaves the house with the rifle and pillowcase full of items, and then he decides to toss the rifle in the water down the street from the home, like toss it into the water. And then he leaves the pillowcase in a storm drain in Brooklyn. So he literally drives to Brooklyn near his work, where he works, and puts the pillowcase in a storm drain. Now, while he tells the detectives this, he also draws out a diagram. He draws out two diagrams, really, or more. So he draws out the house, and then he draws out like where he left the pillowcase in the drain. He draws that out, and then he draws out and tells them specifically where this rifle is. Yes, it should blow my mind. Again, they're pressing him for more and more details because they're like, okay, who did this? Ronnie, who did this? Like, you're saying you woke up and this was here. Well, he's then stating, so now he's talking more. He's talking about the Tony Mazzeo, and now he says that he sees Tony and another man in the house. So he actually sees them. And then they are the ones. So now, I mean, it's changing like before the detective's eyes. He's then telling him that Tony Mazzeo wakes him up, and there's another man with Tony, and makes him shoot his parents and his brother Mark. But then Tony and the other guy shoot John, Don, and Allison. Like, he didn't shoot them all. So now the detectives are like, okay, he's told us about dumping the rifle, dumping the clothes. All of a sudden now he's pulled the trigger, but it's, because this Tony allegedly told him to. So the detectives are looking at Ronnie and they're like, Ronnie, this story is incredible. It's unbelievable. Like, we do not believe you. We do not believe you. And all of a sudden, Ronnie says he shot them all, and he begins to cry, and he states, it all started so fast, and once I started, I just couldn't stop. It went so fast. So he says this. He then lays out how he woke at 3 a.m. on the 13th. He had been asleep in the TV room, which was on the first floor. He then went to his room. He loaded the shotgun, which contains, I believe it contains up to six. He goes to his parents' room. He shoots twice at his dad, twice at his mom. He then goes and stands at Allison's door and shoots her in the head. He then goes to the foot of the boys' beds and shoots each of them in the back, like just standing between. And all of these, all of his family's on the second floor except for Dawn. He says he then went to the third floor, back to his room. He reloads the shotgun. And then he went to Dawn's room where she was standing, and he pushed her on the bed and shot her in the head. That adds up with the physical evidence, by the way. This is what he tells them then. Now, the detectives, I don't believe they had any type of recording device or anything necessarily on him, but detectives ask, there's several of them present during this time, and they ask him to sign a statement to this admission. And he says no, because he didn't want his grandfather, Michael Brigante, to read it. Now, utilizing his diagram, the police officers are literally, they send people out on, and this is happening like on the 14th, right away. They retrieve the pillowcase of items exactly where he told them. He initials off on them being found. Like, he initials off. And then the following day, there are police divers that search the area where Ronnie said that he dumped the rifle into the water, and they find the rifle. Like, they dive and find the rifle. A little side note, I think even that morning before they knew this, they actually dove. There was footage of the police divers. They dove into the Defeo's pool. Like, they were looking everywhere for the murder weapon. So that was very interesting. They were definitely like looking everywhere. But basically, these divers by the 15th, so this would have happened on the 15th, they dove and found the rifle. And again, they log it as evidence along with everything else, and Ronnie signs off that yes, that is accurate. So the true story of Ronnie's whereabouts on the 13th are gathered kind of after his confession is made and through witness statements by the people he was around. So it said that, basically he tells what he did. He killed his family around 3 o'clock. He goes, he showers, all of that, was part of it. He showers, he takes the items, he picks up the cartridges, he takes all of that, puts it in the pillowcase. He dumps the rifle before he leaves. So he's probably leaving his home by, he said, around like 4:30, 4:45-ish. He goes into the city. He does go into work. He, stashes the pillowcase he is calling home, like all while he's at work, and he's not at work long. Like he maybe leaves work by noon, but he is calling home several times. And at the dealership, of course, his father doesn't show up for work. And so he's like, oh, well, I'll call and see. Like, I'll call and check on them. He also calls his girlfriend Sherry to let her know that he would be home early from work. So he is telling them, and she is interviewed, this girlfriend Sherry. Remember this girlfriend Sherry, because we're going to get into this. He tells her he's going to be home early from work. And remember, he hadn't even gone into work on the 12th because he was so-called sick. Now, he wanted to stop by and see her. On his way back into Amityville, Ronnie passes his friend Bobby. The two stop to talk. Ronnie actually proceeds on to Sherry's house. So he gets to Sherry's house about 1:30. I will say this is a little weird, but in the judge's book, he calls Sherry Mindy. I don't know if that's like one of those things where it was logged that her name was Mindy. Maybe she has a name like I will say my L. That's not her legal name. So maybe it's like a legal name issue or whatever. But anyway, long story short, Ronnie is at his girlfriend's house at 1:30 on the 13th. And Sherry is listed as being 19 years old. She's a very popular waitress at one of the bars that Ronnie hangs out with his friends there in Amityville. Upon arriving at Sherry's, now Ronnie mentions to Sherry that he's tried to call home several times. So he's putting that in her head. Okay, oh, I can't get a hold of my parents. And then he tells her, well, all of their cars are in the driveway, but there's no response. And he literally demonstrates this by calling his house from Sherry's apartment, to kind of solidify that or whatever. Now he acts all, puzzled, not concerned, but just puzzled. And he and Sherry hang out all afternoon. Like they go shopping. He takes her to the mall in Massapequa. And a little side note, I don't know if this sounds familiar, but Massapequa. So this horrible instance that's happening on Long Island in the Suffolk County. So remember, the Long Island serial killer, all of this goes down out there. So, and of course, the suspect, he lived in Massapequa. Ronnie and Sherry, they go to the mall. Then they actually drive out to Bobby's house. So that Bobby that's with him that night. So Ronnie gives Bobby kind of the same rundown that he's telling Sherry. He's like, yeah, I don't know what's happened to my family. Like, there's no answer, and I don't have my key, and blah, blah, blah. Like, there's something going on over there. Their cars are in the driveway. I can't get in the house. I've called the house twice, and nobody's answering. Like, he's giving the same thing to Bobby, okay? Now, and keep in mind, I'm going to tell you something later about Bobby, but he throws Bobby under the bus or tries to allege that Bobby was part of the killings later on, by the way. Now, abruptly shifting gears, Ronnie does ask Bobby if he was going out later. So he's like, hey, are you going to be out later? I'm going to go. He mentions like taking a nap, but then he wants to meet up with Bobby at the bar. Okay, Henry's bar. And again, he does. So he meets up with Bobby at the bar at 6. Now, Ronnie spends the remainder of the afternoon literally like drinking with Sherry, drinking with his friends. He takes some heroin. He is doing his thing. And finally, he arrives at Henry's bar at 6. And Bobby is right there behind him, okay? Now, once again, when he's there, Ronnie, he feigning concern for his family over the ability to reach them still. So he tells Bobby, hey, I'm going to go home and break a window to get in. Bobby was like, hey, do what you got to do. Like, get in there. So he's kind of setting this whole thing up. And then he is back, by 6:30 saying, someone shot my mother and father. So that was the quote unquote real outline of his day, what really happened. So now, by November 18th, so, of course, all this happened, his confession on the 14th. On the 18th, Ronald Joseph Defeo Jr., he is indicted by a grand jury on 6 counts of murder. Now, they do post second-degree murder. They go with second-degree murder here. Now, this, on the 18th, is the same day as his family's funeral, which is held at their church, the St. Martin's of Tours, and there are literally 1,000 people in attendance. I mean, this is 6 people. There are 6 caskets. And this church is packed. People that are interviewed at the funeral say how just quiet it was, that everyone was just in shock. And especially to see, like, they kind of rolled like all 6 coffins in, and it's 6 coffins, and it was just horrendous. So many people upset because we're talking 6 people. I mean, you know how many people normally attend a funeral, especially of a young person, but this was 6 and 4 very young people. The judge put over the case. He is a Thomas M. Stark. And I will say I will be posting, of course, my references, and he had an excellent book on this. I'm going to get into books about this and my feelings on that. But he writes a book. He's put in charge of the case against, Ronald Defeo Jr. by the state of New York. He is a very seasoned judge. He graduated from Harvard. Like, he is very good judge. He is a very fair judge. Now, Ronnie is held without bail, and Ronnie's grandfather, Michael Brigante, hires a very prominent defense counselor, a Jacob Siegfried. Now, there are several back and forth pre-trial hearings and such in March. The grand jury meets in November, then fast forward to March, but there's a lot going on in between, like we'll kind of get into, but there's like psychiatrist visits. There's a lot going on. Now, by May 15th, the Jacob Siegfried, he has filed that the defense is going to go with an insanity plea. So now it's kind of like, okay, he's not saying he didn't do it at this point, but he's saying the reason for it. Now, also in May, by the end of the month, the Jacob Siegfried announced that he's withdrawing himself as Ronnie's attorney, and that Brigante won't pay any more for an attorney. And evidently it was due to, like, Ronnie was physically assaulting his own attorney. So they were getting into altercations, and Ronnie was like, tried to beat him. So he was like, I'm out. I'm not doing this. And then Michael comes back and like, I'm not paying for it. I got you this. You didn't go with this. So the court actually appoints William Weber, who, of course, we're going to get into him in the next episode a lot. But at the time, William is a 35-year-old. He had graduated from the Brooklyn Law School. He was actually practicing civil and criminal law at a firm called Mars and Burton out on Long Island. So he was very good. He had a good reputation. So the court and the people of New York actually paid for William Weber, okay? Ronnie's trial begins October 14th, 1975. Now, the prosecutor was 33-year-old attorney named Gerard Sullivan, and he went by Jerry. Now, he was the assistant district attorney with Suffolk County. He had actually always been with the county. He had attended St. John's University Law School, and he had lots of experience in felony law. Like, he had prosecuted a lot of cases. Now, the prosecution had Ronnie's confession, also specifically how he led the investigators directly to dispose of evidence, like his .35 Marlin rifle, and the rifle was positively identified as the murder weapon by the criminalist, okay? So all of the ballistics and such matched even. Sullivan was convinced Ronnie was a pathological liar, a cold-blooded killer, and that he needed to be behind bars for his entire life. On the defense side, of course, William Weber, their defense is innocence by reason of insanity. Now, at the time, the New York state law said a person was legally insane when they could not substantially comprehend their actions. Like, they literally had zero understanding of their actions. Of course, that would mean like that they didn't know that they had done wrong. Sullivan opens with his statements. He says, "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, each of you will be changed to some degree by this case. You will leave the courtroom after rendering a verdict, perhaps a month from now, carrying with you an abiding memory of the horror that occurred in that house at 112 Ocean Avenue in the dead of night 11 months ago. Much of the evidence of how will bear upon the issue of whether you will excuse the defendant for his actions by reason of some mental disease or defect. I am confident you will find Ronald Defeo Jr. guilty of 6 counts of second-degree murder. Now, Weber, in the pretrial hearings, he did try to get the case dismissed, as defense attorneys do, due to the allegation that Ronnie was refused access to legal counsel, that the confession happened under duress, and the line and the police, that the police physically abused Ronnie. Now, the judge heard, they went through these pretrial hearings in March. The judge heard all the witnesses. Now, most of the witnesses regarding, Ronnie's side of things was Ronnie, and he was not believable. And then all the people on the prosecution side were actual, witnesses. There was, the prosecution called a lot of witnesses, but Weber really only had Ronnie, and then the other person that he had was actually Michael Brigante was called because he had connections. He had come up with, the police had used, Ronnie, but there was people that had come up and said, no, Ronnie had actually he had gotten in a fight with, I guess, Ronnie Sr. even a couple days before. So he did have a little bit of a split lip or whatever, but there was no indication that the police had beat him up or anything like that. So the judge ruled against all of these things that the defense tried to pull up. Prosecution, they called on the detectives plus Ronnie's relatives. Now, one witness for the prosecution was an Officer DeVito, that he actually worked in the jail Ronnie was in when he was arrested. So he would testify that while in jail, Ronnie himself stated that he would be in and out of hospitals, and then he would collect his family's life insurance, giving kind of motive. So allegedly, he was going to inherit $200,000 in life insurance monies. Likewise, an inmate beside Ronnie testified that Ronnie told him that he went berserk and killed them all. Additionally, he had told this same inmate named Kramer about stealing the bank deposit from the dealership situation. So he admitted to this inmate that he had stolen the bank deposit and that he had gone berserk and killed his whole family. Now, to prove Ronnie not insane, but that he murdered his family purposefully, the one witness that really helped the prosecution was Ronnie himself when Weber called him to the stand. Now, Ronnie spent 3 days on the witness stand. And when he got up, it said that he, gets up there on the stand. He is smirking. His shirt's unbuttoned, just real unprofessional appearance. And Weber shows Ronnie a picture of Louise, literally dead in her bed, murdered in her bed. And he asks Ronnie, "That's your mother, isn't it?" And Ronnie states, "No, sir. I told you before. I'll say it again. I never saw this person before in my life. I don't know this person." When Ronnie was asked if he killed his father, he said, "I did kill him. I killed them all. Yes, sir. I killed them all in self-defense." So now he's claiming they were going to kill him. Now Weber continues asking why Ronnie had done such a thing. And he states, "As far as I'm concerned, if I don't kill them, my family, they were going to kill me. And as far as I'm concerned, what I did was self-defense and there was nothing wrong with it. When I got the gun in my hand, there's no doubt in my mind who I am. I am God." On cross-examination, Sullivan kind of exposed his inconsistencies because Ronnie's statements, even at trial, are completely inconsistent with what he was saying the whole time. And of course, he has altered his story multiple times. And we're going to get into it because he continues to do this. He continues to lie and make up stories and all sorts of things. Now, prosecution also, they wanted to inflame Ronnie and show him on the stand to be violent and dangerous and a killer. So he's trying to, Sullivan's trying to make him look bad, of course. Now, as Sullivan concentrated on his questions like regarding the actual murders. So he asked Ronnie, "You felt good at the time?" And Ronnie says, "Yes, sir. I believe it felt very good." "Is that because you knew they were dead? Because you had given them each 2 shots?" As in talking about the parents. And he says, "I don't know why I can't answer that honestly." And Sullivan says, "Do you remember being glad?" And Ronnie stated, "I don't remember being glad. I remember feeling good. Very good." Further in question, Sullivan enrages Ronnie. Ronnie yells at the prosecutor. So he yells this, "If I had any sense, which I don't, I'd come down there and kill you now." So he yells this at Sullivan. Now, both sides, the prosecution and the defense, they both hire very respectable, experienced psychiatrists. So the defense, they get a Dr. Daniel Schwartz. Again, he's very experienced. He had a history. He had testified in hundreds of cases. In fact, a little side note. So he would gain national notoriety as the psychiatrist who finds David Berkowitz to be criminally insane during the Son of Sam killings, which happened right after this case, basically. So it's like this case happens, and then the Son of Sam killings are going on between 75 and 77. So just right after this. Now, Sullivan knew that Schwartz would be believable. He is a very experienced, psychiatrist. However, he knew the jury, had spent, by this time, and by, the jury had gone through, this whole experience. He knew that they would not really believe, like they had spent a lot more time with Ronnie and his lies and deceptions, that they would kind of know about all his statements. So he really drove home to the jury that Dr. Schwartz had only spoken to Ronnie for, a couple hours. He was like, "Yes, Dr. Schwartz, you only talked to him for 2 hours. You don't know the real Ronnie." Now, Sullivan also injects into the cross-examination, like going into Schwartz, he says everything that he could get that would connect him to the crime, he removes from the house, didn't he? On the same line of questioning, lets Dr. Schwartz concede that when he asked Ronnie about the casings, Ronnie said he didn't want to leave the police any clues. He wasn't a friend to the cops, and he didn't want to help them along. So Sullivan is driving home that all of this evidence Ronnie is hiding. And if you're hiding evidence, then that is saying that what you did is wrong. And that is, again, against this whole criminally insane situation defense. Now, the psychiatrist for the prosecution is a Dr. Harold Zolan. Now, Zolan testifies that Ronnie, based on Zolan's assessment, has an antisocial personality, a form of personality disorder that makes you that you are fully aware of your actions and you are fully able to comprehend the difference between right and wrong, but you are motivated by imperious or self-centered attitudes, like you're just very self-involved. Now, Weber tries to rattle Zolan the way that Sullivan had gotten to Schwartz, but it didn't work. Like, Dr. Zolan just stays the course, and he's like, no, he knew exactly what he was doing. He just has this personality disorder. He's just antisocial. Now, after both sides, so they rest their case. By the way, there are like 20 witnesses called. There are 13 items put into evidence. So now both sides rest and both sides summarize their case and do their closing arguments. Now, November 19th, the judge, and this is of 1975, Judge Thomas, he sends them out. He sends the jury to go deliberate. Now, the jury's initial vote on the case was 10-2. So 2 not guilty. There were 2 people that were kind of like, they were holdouts, okay? Now, however, they go back and review. So they actually review Defeo's testimony, Ronnie's testimony, and they come back unanimous and guilty of the 6 counts of second-degree murder. Now, this is by the 21st, so 2 days. After 2 days of deliberation, they come back and say he is guilty. And then 2 weeks later is the sentencing. And Ronnie is sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. We're going to talk about afterwards, okay? We're going to talk about the books. I had actually ordered a book. I was so excited because I wanted to get a book specifically about the Defeos. And so I order this book, and I'm not going to reference it because I don't utilize the book. But it is written by Rick Asuna, The Night the Defeos Died. It says reinvestigating the Amityville murders. And I believe it was written like in 2006, which probably should have been my first kind of clue or whatever. I probably shouldn't have done that. But anyway, so I do dive into the book, and the book is actually, so the Rick Asuno, he does a lot of investigating, not to say anything against that, but he is basically going off of information provided by a woman named Geraldine Defeo. Now, Geraldine allegedly was, quote unquote, married to Ronnie, allegedly, at the time of the murder. So in the book, it's outlining like all this information, all this hearsay from Geraldine. And then I do believe Rick had actually met with Ronnie himself, which Ronnie just lies. And we'll get into some things, the aftermath. But he only talks to Ronnie for a minute. And then I think Ronnie even says later on that he refutes the book and refutes any knowledge of the book or any involvement with this book. So this book is basically comprised of information by Geraldine. So that's what we're looking at here. And so the thing about it is, and most of the book is also talking about how corrupt the Suffolk County police are. So it's basically painting the picture Ronnie didn't maybe do the murders, and that maybe it was a mafia hit or whatever, but that the Suffolk County did a bad job. And Geraldine, they talk about how horrible Ronnie Sr. was and all these things, but she did evidently, give information to Rick. I can't, in my head, use any of that information, like none of that. I just can't. Not going to go there, and we'll kind of talk about why. But after Ronnie is, convicted, so he is sent to the Sullivan Correctional Facility in Fallsburg, New York, until his death. Now, he does put in a lot of appeals. We'll talk about it. Gets up for parole, but the parole board never lets him out. So he is never let out, and he will die in 21. So only a few years ago. So he was in jail a long time, like a very long time, because he was a young man. Now, the controversies with this case, and of course we talked about it. So it was alleged pretty early on that all of the victims were found laying down, face down in their beds, and that didn't make sense. Of course, even Dr. Adelson, the medical examiner, he was said to quote at the beginning, he didn't see how one person could do this, but then he said, well, they could. And I will say there is evidence, compelling evidence, physical evidence to show that Louise, she wasn't shot face down in her bed. Dawn was not laying in the bed, and Allison had even begun to sit up. So what they believe happened, and I can totally see that a shotgun is loud, but it is 3:00 in the morning. And I don't know about you guys, I'm a light sleeper. So I do believe totally in Ronnie's statement that he loaded his shotgun, he went to his parents' bedroom, he opened the door, he fired a couple shots at his dad, and his dad was asleep. And then he fired at his mom, but she had gotten up. So again, she's clutching the gold chain. She wasn't shot first. She hears it. She sits up. Okay. Now the little boys, they hadn't moved. And that is it is compelling, but then it's not, because I think most children are deep sleepers. I know my kid is a deep sleeper. She sleeps on her stomach. She sleeps exactly the way that these boys were killed. So that doesn't look weird to me at all, that, okay, the parents were shot. He goes right across the hall. He shoots the little boys. Now, Allison is stirring, because now there have been 4 shots. Okay, 4 shots have been fired, and it's a shotgun, and it's right there. Now, he shoots Allison. Now, Dawn is on the 3rd floor. Okay, she's on the 3rd floor. It's 3 a.m. By the time he gets up there, she is awake. He shoots her, and then it's done. So is that a far stretch? I don't think so, in my opinion. But it was weird to people. A lot was put on the fact that there was no sound suppression done, that the Defeos hadn't been drugged, because it was said at first, well, I drugged them. Ronnie had a lot of statements. In fact, he even talked on stand about hearing the voices, which we'll get into a lot in the second round. But, he was also trying to look what he thought was criminally insane as well. So he was trying to act like he was insane. And he does talk about a volatile relationship with his father and all of these things. Well, by 1986, I will say one of his statements was that he alleged that Dawn actually killed their father and then went and killed the mom and killed the siblings. Then he was trying to wrestle the rifle out of Dawn's hands. He got it and then killed her. So that was one of his stories, and he put this forward in 1986. And this is about the same time as the first time you actually hear about the Geraldine lady. Ronnie is filing appeals. So he's trying to get his conviction turned over. He's trying to fight his conviction, and he is telling everybody, and then the judge, like, hey, I had a wife. In fact, he goes as far as to say, I had a wife and a kid at the time, and I was with them. Like, I'm a married man, and I was with them, and there was no way that I did this. So he is filing motions to vacate his conviction, even in 1990, and all these things are just overturned. Okay, all these motions are overturned. He is telling all these stories. The Judge Stark is like, look, if you were so-called married in 1974 and had a child, why were you talking about in your statements how you lived at home and that you went to work with your dad and, you were just living at home and you had a girlfriend named Sherry? Like, why didn't you mention any of this before? So there was no actual evidence of this Geraldine, but this Geraldine and this Rick Osana, so in 2000, they're getting together. She's just saying that how she was scared to come forward before, but now she was ready. So they write this book. I'm not reading it. I'm not utilizing it. I really thought it was going to be something different, but I will say the Thomas Stark book, the judge book, is good. And then the prosecutor wrote a book. So I would look more into those if you're interested about reading about the case or whatever, because I will say they had tried to get Freedom of Information Acts to get the whole case file. So the whole case file is not out there. I don't think it's able to be out there, but these other books are really good. But it did come back, in 2000, after all this comes forward about how he was married, and then he's proposing that Bobby was the one to actually shoot his parents with him. So then it was like, Dawn did it, Bobby did it, the Mafia did it. So all of these other people were involved in the murdering of his family, okay? And all these stories are coming out, and even other people, after Rick's book comes out, they're saying, okay, you need to stop listening to these claims. Obviously, he's a liar. Anyone connected with him is a liar. And it did come out, yes, Geraldine did marry Defeo, but they actually got divorced in 1993, And in the case, it says that they did not get married actually until 1989. So they were only married for 4 years. Of course, he's in jail this whole time. So in Rick's book, his line of thinking is that Geraldine had filed all these affidavits, that she had people go file affidavits to prove that they were quote unquote married in 1974 and all these things. Bottom line is the actual evidence showed that they had not married until 1989, because truly Ronnie was a kid. He was, even though he was 23, he was living at home. His parents and grandparents were paying his way. He had a girlfriend. He had several girlfriends. Yeah, he was not married with a kid at that time. Bottom line is Ronnie went back and forth with different things through the 80s. He did some interviews. In fact, he talked about how his dad was his best friend. So later on, he was like, when he was older, he's like, yeah, my dad was my best friend. He was, this and that, and just good things to say. And he talks about how much he loved his mom, loved his family, and that he just hated that in fact, he talks about what happened but then it happened and you can't help what happened, just kind of like, okay, it happened. So he does, when you see Ronnie in interviews and when you look at this case, it's just a very sad case of family annihilation for whatever reason. And if I was part of the jury, I can see why they convicted. I can see why the judge and the prosecutor thought that this was the most heinous thing that they had ever seen. It certainly is, with a sad ending. And Ronnie was truly a very sad person. What I do want to remember is the Defeo family, they had a lot of friends and family. Obviously, 1,000 people show up for their funeral, and they get lost in this whole Amityville situation. But it's just a very sad case, and we need to remember all their lives lost. Thank you for listening to this episode. Definitely go and join the Facebook group and follow me on Instagram and TikTok, and hug your families, love your families. I will be back next week talking about Amityville still, but it is totally going to be taken up with December of 1975, and we're going to get into the Lutz family and the hauntings and just all the lore that came out after this time. So have a great week. I'll see you guys later. Bye.